Alright YouTube, we're going to replace a circulator pump today. In fact, we're going to replace this circulator pump. So this pump for a little while has had bearing noise and it's definitely sounded like it was failing. So I'm going to swap it out today and I'll show you how. So to do this job, we're going to need a few tools I've laid out. And they are right here. So we've got a towel, some wrenches, a couple of screwdrivers, and a pair of wire cutters. So I'll take you through what you use each of these for. The pump that we're going to install today and replace the existing one is with this unit. This is a Taco 3-speed ECM pump, and what that means is electronically commutated motor. And all it really means is it's a new style of motor. It no longer uses traditional, I guess you'd say, like magnetic brushes. So these save a lot of power. They're supposed to be the future. I hope they last as long. And this pump actually is kind of unique, and I'll pull this over. Take a look at the top. So this actually has 4 bolt holes on it, and what's pretty neat about this is, depending on your installation, you can have the pump rotated this way or that way. So sometimes you need to have a pump in a different configuration. So Taco makes this pump, and it's fairly universal. So if you're going to buy one pump, this is a good one. In addition, if you look closely here, you're going to notice that there is a low, medium, and high. Let's see if we can zoom in. Low, medium, and high on this. And that's so you can actually dial in the speed. So you can get it exactly how you want it. And actually, one other thing I should point out too. If you notice that little thing that says status, that's actually an LED. So sometimes these pumps are actually so quiet you can hardly hear them running. So it's very important to have that light. And actually, if you look at the picture here, you can see that LED. In addition, in the box, you also get, obviously, instructions. You get O-rings, and the last piece you get is this little check valve. And this little check valve will actually get installed into the pump, and I'll show that in a minute. So, talk about these O-rings for a second. When you go to supply houses, a lot of professional plumbers do not like these O-rings, and they're actually pretty neat. They sit directly into that groove, and push them in there a little bit. And Taco's directions specifically say do not use any of the kind of sealant or any of the kind of O-ring. So traditionally plumbers like to use the large square sealing pads, and I think that you see that all the time. So the only comment about that is that these directions specifically say not to do that. They say the warranty is voided if you use any other O-ring except for that one. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just telling you what it says. So let's move on. So on my particular installation, I've actually got 2 shutoffs here on my circulator. So again, this is a circulator I'm changing. The electricity to the boiler is off. So at this point, what I've got to do is 2 things. I've got to remove the pump physically to get the water pump portion of it out, and then I've got to do this electrical piece to connect the new pump. So I'll show you a few steps. So on mine, I am very fortunate. I have these shutoff valves. So I'm going to turn each of them all the way off. So you may not have shutoff valves, and if you don't, what that typically means you've got to do is you've got to shut all the power off, and then you've got to drain the water out of your boiler. Some people will drain as much as they can. They'll use these types of drains, and then they'll just go for it. They'll unbolt this, and they'll try to catch the water. It's a little bit more complicated to drain your boiler out, but I'll show you how it's done on mine, and you can see if you can find your own way, or if you have shutoffs, you can do the same that I'm doing. So next thing I'm going to do, point of the towel, obviously, is to catch some water. So even though I have these water valves shut off all the way, when I take this out and I loosen these bolts, I'm going to lose some water, and it's going to come down. So this can be really hot water. I know this zone has been off for a while, so it's actually fairly cool. But again, if you've got boiling water coming out, you got to be careful. So next thing I'm going to do is that each of these flanges has 2 bolts, and I've got to remove those. So I'm going to put a wrench. I'm going to use 2 wrenches for this. You have an upper bolt and a lower. I'm going to loosen each of these. I'll take them both off, and you'll see that the water is going to come off out of both of these. So if your bolts have been on here a long, long time, that can actually be pretty tricky. You can start to see the water's coming out now, and again, the power's off, and I have the breaker off as well, so I shouldn't have any problems with that. I'm going to take these bolts out, and then I'm going to get the bolts in the back as well. So I have one more to go. Alright, you can see a bunch of water coming out. Hopefully these valves will hold. But there's a good amount of water in this little section, so that's why I put the towel there to catch it. So when I remove this now, this pump is going to be free when I lift this, so you want to be ready to catch it. So I'm going to lift this pipe a little, and there's the water. I might have to support that a little bit. So you got to be careful with plumbing, because sometimes if I just let this go, it can actually break off. So what I'm going to try to do, this isn't necessarily the most amazing thing in the world. I'm actually going to place this wrench here just temporarily, just to hold that. I'm going to make sure these O-rings, if you notice right here, this O-ring is still seated. So we're going to get that out of here. So we're going to take that out. And the next thing, actually, while I'm here, is going to clean these flanges a little bit. It's important with these new seals that you get a clean base. You can see quite a bit of buildup there. So I'll do the same with this. I'll try to tighten that a little bit more. There we go. I think that'll actually hold a little better. So again, I'm going to check to make sure that there's nothing coming out. I'm going to just brace that. Let's see if we can get that on there. Okay. Just to hold that, tighten that a little bit. So again, I wouldn't want to leave this like this, but that's long enough just to keep the plumbing from falling. Now we're going to work on the wiring for the pump. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this little cover off to get the wiring exposed. Alright, so for electrical wiring, this is something you may want to watch another video, but in my case, there's two wires in here. You've got a hot and a neutral, and all I've got to do is undo these wire nuts. And actually, I'm going to support this a little bit while I do this. So I'm going to undo these. Alright. Hot and the neutral. The next thing I've got to do is there's a little nut in here. You can see that little nut in the back. And again, you gotta make sure your wiring is off. I mean your power is off, obviously. I'll pull that out. Alright, so the old pump is completely off. Just make sure. Okay, so the next thing I want to explain is if you look on the base of this pump, you're going to see a little dirty thing in there, and that's okay that it's not so clean. That is this. And this is that check valve that I talked about earlier. So what happens with what they do is they generally will supply this with certain model pumps. So that's why it's important to take your old model number and give that to your supply house so that they can help you. So what we've got to do now is take our new pump and put this in the same location per the directions. So again, in my case, my pump was installed like this. The check valve was in the bottom. So that's exactly how we're going to install the new one. So I'm going to put the old pump aside. Take the new pump, which is right here. And I might just put a little bit of water in the inside to help lubricate it a little bit. And we are going to put it in. The way this goes, it actually installs just like the old one. So you're going to put it in. Just check the spring a little bit. If you notice on this, if you push this in a little bit, it's got a little spring action. So we're going to insert this in the bottom. And press that in all the way. It's good with an O-ring sometimes to rotate just gently to make sure it's in all the way. And again, that goes in far. So when I just first pushed that in, it didn't feel like it went in all the way. And I just pushed it in the extra distance. And now it really is in. So that's as far in as it's going to go. So now you can see we have our new one in. So now at this point, I actually can install the pump into the location, and we can do the wiring after. So I think that's actually what I'm going to do. So I'm going to take this little cover off, and if you notice, they've already got this popped out on the bottom. So what I'm going to do now is, let's see if I can give you a shot of this. I'm going to just unscrew this up. This is for the electrical. Take this cover off. Put that little screw aside. And that's our electrical. And these new ones are very, very easy. So I'm going to put that cover aside. And the next thing we're going to do is get our pump ready to install. So the next thing we want to do is take our brand new O-rings and we want to put them in the pump. So what I personally like to do, I like to put them in place on the pump first. And they do push into these grooves pretty well. So I'm going to set these in. Now this is where you can get into trouble, because when you go to install these, it's very, very easy to have these fall off while you're working. And you can also knock them out of place while you're putting them on. So you want to make sure they're set in there pretty well. You've got your check valve in place. The other thing that's incredibly important, and I haven't mentioned it yet, is these pumps have a direction. And the key, you can hardly see this, but there is an arrow right there, and that arrow is pointing down. So the only thing you need to know is that these pumps have to be installed with the flow going a certain way. Now, so make sure the direction of the pump is flowing the way the existing pump was, and you should be fine. So now that we've got our O-rings in place, we're going to go put this back onto the pump flange. I'm going to double check, make sure our O-rings are in place. You see I have these first O-ring on the bottom, and I have another one here, and they're seated very well. So the next thing I need to do is to take my little temporary wrench that was kind of holding this all up. I'm going to see if I can dry some of this water. And again, make sure that flange is clean, because if it's not, that's when you're really going to have some sealing troubles. So we're going to set this right in place where the bolt holes are. So because I've got a little bit of water coming out, not the end of the world, but I also don't want to take all day on this either. So we're going to get these bolts going in. Start threading these in. I'm going to thread them all by hand to start. And remember, you can do your wiring after. Alright, we'll put the back ones on. Move this so you can see these. And we'll install our back bolts. So again, all I'm doing is I'm snugging it. You can hear my kids in the background. Typical day here. Alright, so at this point, the bolts are all in. So this new pump is a little bit different than the original in the sense that you no longer need to put a wrench on both sides, and it's the reverse of what I told you. These bolts actually fit into a tiny little groove that is here, and they actually hold it for you. So now I actually have to tighten it using the top bolts. So the other thing with plumbing that I really like to do is before I tighten these up, just actually loosening that for a minute, I just want to make sure that I don't have any kind of tension on this, so I just wiggle a little bit, and now I'm going to start to tighten this. So again, you want to tighten. You obviously have to tighten both sides, front and back, and I like to alternate a bit. I'll tighten this, and already I can see that the water is starting to stop, which is probably a good thing. I'll do the bottom, do the opposite side. So this is where you're going to see a big difference of how people do this. I tighten them pretty tight. I'm sure they can be too tight, but I don't think I want to find any leaks. So the other thing to remember with a lot of heating is that heating pressures are typically less than 20 psi. So most often you do want things very tight, but it shouldn't take an enormous amount of force to seal because you don't have as much pressure. So at this point, these bolts are in place. I got the front and back pretty tight. Alright, so as far as the water portion of this pump goes, this part's done. So now everything's tightened up and it's all in place. I believe our gaskets are in good shape. I didn't see anything come out, and I think things are pretty well sealed. Air in here. So now these are open if you have these shut-off valves. So at this point, if you didn't have shut-off valves, I would continue and do the electrical and do everything at the end. So now we're going to move on to the electrical. So the first thing I've got to do is I've actually got to put this into the box. So if you notice, the way you do these, first you put the wire in. And the way I like to do it is I like to get the wire in pretty much all the way. And you notice this little metal part goes in, but it's obviously loose. So the next thing you need to do is that nut that you had taken off before. You put that on your wires, and that gets threaded onto this, which is the top of the connector. These can be a little bit finicky to get on. They're real rough thread. Let's see if we can get this. Alright. So once this gets on, you can tighten that up a bit. Again, it doesn't have to be blistering tight. Alright. So now we're getting somewhere. So the last thing we need to do is connect the white and the black, and this is my original wiring. And sometimes these wires can be really beat up. They actually look pretty good to me, so I'm not going to recut them or strip them or anything. I'm going to use them just as is. And then now I've got the pump wire. So I'm going to show you another thing that's a little bit different. Instead of just using, these were what was originally on there, and that's fine, you can use these. I have another idea, and I'm going to show that to you right now. Alright, YouTubers, brace yourself for something. Alright, this is where people get upset. So you're going to see this little thing, you say, what is this piece of junk, right? So this thing right here, I don't know how well you can see it, is actually a brand, if you can hear over my kids screaming, called Wago. And this is a different kind of electrical connector. One of the real benefits of this, they do really well when you're mixing types of wire. So obviously from the pump, and I'm going to just twist these a little bit, this is stranded wire. And you can see that this has a bunch of strands. And from your house wire, you're almost always going to have solid connections like this. So what's really great about these, they do really well when you mix solid and stranded wire, which sometimes with wire nuts that can be a problem, and they can come off over time. The other benefits of this is when you want to remove them, they come off easily and they don't damage the wire. So the way these work, and I like these a lot, you lift these up, and you have to push them all the way up, these little tiny levers. Once those levers are up, all you have to do is set them on the wire and click this, and that's it. I pull that as hard as I want, that's not coming off. So at that point, I've just got to reconnect the pump, and we're getting on our way. So actually, in looking at this, I don't love how curly this wire is, so I am going to restrip these. So I'm just going to use my wire cut as I hold on, so it doesn't go shooting across the room. And what I'm going to do is just cut each of these. You don't want to do this 100 times, but that's the benefit of the Wego connectors, is once you put these on, you'll never damage this wire again if you have to change the pump again. Alright, so all we're going to do now, we're just going to strip some insulation off these wires, and we're ready to install. Let's take this. This looks like 14 gauge to me, which is how I'm going to line this up. Whoops. It looks quite a bit better to me. Just nice and clean, and it's straight, which these connectors prefer. So another cool thing about this is you can actually do some of your wiring, so you can sort of split it up. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'll put one, you can see there's 2 holes in this, and they make different versions. They have ones with 3 holes, 5 holes, and more. So we're going to just put this onto the first leg. And what's most important when you look at this, you don't want to see any copper insulation at the bottom of this, so you shouldn't have anything exposed. So again, I push that down, that's on there nice and tight. Second one, I'm going to flip these levers up, like this. Put that on. So now we've got the hot and the neutral, and now we're going to take the pumps, hot and neutral, and I'll twist these just a little bit, and I put them in to the Wago, lock that in, and I'm going to put the second in as well. So I would say that one downside of these Wego connectors is that sometimes they're a little bigger than wire nuts and they won't fit in the box, which means that when you fold them up and put them inside here, sometimes they're a little tight. But in this case, I should have plenty of room. And most modern stuff is starting to realize that a lot of people use these connectors and they need a little bit more room. So I find that sometimes these boxes are a bit larger. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tuck these in. I'll try to stay out of the angle. And what I like to do is I don't just shove these in like a madman. I try to curl them around a little bit. And one particular thing I do with all wire connectors, no matter what style they are, I try to point them upward, because if there was ever water that came in the box, I prefer that the water not go into the connector. That's not always possible to do. That's not a requirement. That's just something that I've done over the years. So I'm going to push this in. So one thing that is important, and I'll give you a close-up of this, and these will get pushed in with the cover a little bit, is you're going to see that right here, right where my little pinky is, that's the screw hole for the cover. So whatever you do, you don't want to leave the wire right over that cover. You want to make sure that when you put your cover on, it's going to be able to go into that screw hole. Alright, cover's installed. Need to put a screw on it and we'll test it out. So my heat's on. You can actually see that little light is already going, which that means the water is running. I actually have it set to low, as you can see. And for my installation, that's fine, because this is only running a very small loop. If you were running your whole house, and I hope you can hear me talking over my heat, if you were running a whole house, you would likely increase that dial to a higher speed. So at this point, I'm just putting my hand on the pipe, and it feels to me like this is circulating great. So I'm going to check it a little bit closer for leaks, and then we'll go from there. Let's see what we got. Don't see anything there. Bottom looks good. Top looks good. Pump's running. Heat's running. And I think we're all set. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more videos.